then we got cut off.
Yeah, I had a small number of subscribers, and oh, can you see me? Let's see. There we go. I had a
Yeah.
small number of subscribers, mostly friends and family who were, just did a few things. And I'd been blogging for a while, and I got interested in your stuff, and I'd been reading Neil Postman, rereading "Amusing Ourselves to Death" from the '80s. I'd read that when I was in college,
Yeah.
and I thought, there's something to Peterson and YouTube, and so I thought, well, I'll just make a video about this, and then I just made a video, and then Google does its thing, and then I had 200 subscribers and 500 subscribers, and when it hit about 2,000 subscribers, it was kind of unnerving, and I thought, well, this is really strange. I really don't want this messing up my life. And then I started getting letters from people, and people started showing up at my church, and I'm like, well, what on earth am I going to do with all this? And
Yeah.
but then, I thought about it, and I said, well, I'll do with this what I do with everything else. And a friend of mine in Southern California said, well, you should start a meetup. So I thought, yeah, that's what I should do. And so I put out a video and said, if anybody wants to meet up and talk about Jordan Peterson stuff, here's the time and the date, and we'll show up at my church and we'll talk. And that had a good response. And what struck me about, I was interested in your videos because I think in some ways you're trying to reconnect the world in terms of, the, meaning and matter. And I was interested in that. But then I really saw how many people were saying things like, oh, I've been watching Jordan Peterson, and I'm interested in Christianity, and I think I want to go to church. And I thought, well, I now this is part of my job. This is what I do. Pastors are kind of like sheepdogs. We corral people. And so then I just decided to keep the conversation going with people. And so I've continued to make videos, and I found it very gratifying. The amount of resources that have come my way in terms of, people are sending me book recommendations, other authors to follow, so on and so forth. It's just been an explosion. So it's been terrifically helpful for me.
So I'm going to just check your YouTube channel here. How many subscribers do you have now?
Well, I'm getting close to 5,000 now.
And what's your most successful video? How many viewers do you have?
The most successful one was the one that went viral initially. That was about 50,000 views. And that was one of the early ones where I was just trying this thing out. And the video was basically about, why a pastor thinks Jordan Peterson is important. And I just had some questions.
Right. Yes, that's probably, I watched a couple of them, and I think that was probably one of them. And yeah, so I'm going to release a video tomorrow on Easter.
Oh.
I wrote a column for the London Times on Easter.
Yep.
And I'm going to read, I have an updated version of that. So I'm going to read it, but it's a 5-part commentary on Easter. So you might be interested in taking a look at that. It's a really hard slog, I would say, but I wanted to say something useful about the idea of the death and resurrection, and which is obviously the touchiest of subjects, you might say.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite happy with how it's turning out.
Good. I watched.
I'm trying to stick mostly to the psychological end of it,
Yeah.
although I've been trying in all of what I'm doing not to try to reduce things to the psychological, because I don't think that that's necessary. You can leave whatever else these profound stories might be untouched and still discuss them psychologically.
The response to your biblical lectures have been interesting, and the fascination that people have with you to try to figure you out has been very interesting. I don't know if that's a
Yeah, well,
function of status or just culture wars or what.
well, I've been fortunate enough to straddle this strange line, where I annoy a fair number of Christians, but I attract a fair number of atheists. So, it's a very tight line to walk. And people would rather that it was that what I was doing, I suppose, was easy to put in a box, because if you can put something in a box, then it's easier to ignore it.
Yeah.
But it actually turns out that it's not so easy to ignore the biblical stories. So
they have a way of getting in your head and not leaving.
that they certainly do. Yes, that's true. And the more seriously you take them, the worse that becomes.
Oh,
Or
that's
better, depending on how you look at it, or both. Which is probably more accurate.
that's probably the most accurate. Now, in some of the more recent, one of the first things that I thought of when I started listening to you was C.S. Lewis, and I've noticed that a number of the reviews of your book have focused in on him too. Have you read any Lewis?
Yes. I don't know if the comparison is particularly apt, except that he was a recent Christian apologist, let's say, who you could take seriously from an intellectual perspective.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think the difference is that he was really coming at what he was doing from, let's say, within the church, whereas I'm coming at it, well, I don't know if from outside is exactly the right way of terming it, but I don't think I'm a Christian apologist in the same way that C.S. Lewis is, because it isn't obvious, like it isn't easy to put my finger on exactly what the difference is. I think the fundamental difference is that I think it is that fundamentally I'm coming at these stories from a psychological perspective, even though I don't believe that exhausts them.
Right.
Whereas he was coming at them from a religious perspective and speaking of them psychologically.
Yeah.
But, there's lots of things about, even reading Jung, Jung mostly came at religious conceptualization psychologically, but he was never a reductionist.
Yeah.
Quite the contrary. Especially with his work on synchronicity, which is, you see, this is one of the things that tilts me more and more towards, well, at least towards the idea that we really don't know anything. But the idea of synchronicity, one of the things I've learned from reading comparative mythology, especially the stories surrounding the death and resurrection, is that the story echoes across very many levels of analysis, including the astrological level. There's this incredible cosmic mythology that lines up with the death and resurrection of Christ. And you think, well, there's only two explanations for that. One is that, well, let's say there's three explanations. Let's say there's two explanations for it. One is that there's been so much work done on the Christianizing of the world over a 2,000-year period that everything bears its mark, including cosmological speculation. But an alternative hypothesis is that as something becomes more significant as an event, more and more things bend to align with it. And so, I don't know, there's a metaphorical truth in the idea that Christ's passion is written in the stars. But there might be something that's more than metaphorical about that too, because when things of incredible import occur, it looks like many things bend in their direction. And I don't really know how to understand that. I mean, I understand it, at least in part, with the kind of terminology that Jung used when he described synchronous events. And I've had very powerful synchronous events occur in my life, things that were not easy to shake off as mere coincidence. So anyways, I'm not sure the comparisons to C.S. Lewis are entirely appropriate, but I understand why they're being made.
Yeah. You know, it's
fine. It's a fine thing.
well, you know, it's interesting how you talk about it warping, because when I think about the story that you've been on for the last 2 years, it's very interesting how, you know, what things have come your way. Why, you know, Colin DeYoung, after I started making videos, reached out to me, and I've been conversing with him via email, and he said, "Oh, you can mention him on your talk with him." And you know, so he pointed me to some of your older lectures, and it's been very interesting why now this thing has shaped around you as it has. And you might say you're not an intentional Christian apologist like C.S. Lewis was, but the thing that struck me immediately was you're leaving in your wake quite a few people who are coming to people like myself. And when I talked to Jonathan Pajot, he said similar things, who are coming to him and saying, you know, I'm really interested in Christianity. And after I made that video, a guy shows up in my church and says, I've never been to church before in my life, but, you know, I watched Jordan Peterson. I've been watching him for a while, and then I listened to you, and here I am. And so
Yeah.
There's a reason why something's happening. When I say revival, I don't mean tent meeting as in the U.S. South. I mean more in the early 20th century when Korea went from 0% Christian to 40% Christian in 25 years. Now, I don't know if something like that's going to happen, but something's in your wake. And I'm trying to figure out both what it is and what you're doing that's making this happen. And I don't know.
Well, some of it is, I suppose some of it is conscious. You know, after writing Maps of Meaning, I was definitely convinced that there was something about the West's foundational stories that were metaphorically and literally correct. They weren't just arbitrary. Like the idea that something like the sovereignty of the individual should be the supreme moral value. I think that's correct. I don't see any alternative to tribalism other than that. There is that really powerful universalizing tendency in Christianity to make the logos sovereign. And I don't see anything in that except truth. And I think I really do believe that the reasons that our societies work is because their metaphysical foundations are built on rock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm going to outline that a lot more in this video I'm doing tomorrow that I mentioned to you on Easter. I've been trying to put together the pieces of the story of Christ conceptually. You know, because it's all one thing, right? In a sense, the idea that Christ is the living truth, that the Logos is the Word of God, that the Logos is what was used at the beginning of time to create habitable order, the idea that Spirit dwells within us, the idea of the eternality of the soul, the idea of the death and resurrection. That's all the same idea, even though it branches out in this multiplicitous manner. And it's not easy to understand, for example, why the idea of the Logos and the idea of the death and resurrection are the same idea. It's not obvious at all why those are the same idea, but they are. And I've been trying to elaborate that more and more and to make it personal also for people, because I do think we know something as clinicians too. Like we do know that people's mental health trajectory is proportionate to the degree that they're willing to voluntarily confront things that upset and frighten them. And the idea, that's a very similar idea to the voluntary raising of the cross or the imitation of Christ. It's very, very similar. And the evidence that that's curative is overwhelming, right? It's one of the cornerstones of clinical intervention. And I would say it's partly a cornerstone of it because of the influence of Christianity. It's like one of the things that the psychotherapists of the 20th century rediscovered was that truthful dialogue was curative. So that the truth was curative in a spiritual sense. And I just think that's true. And then that's associated, I guess, to some degree with the idea of the death and resurrection, because the truth does kill you. It kills off all those parts of you that can't withstand it. And that's a lot of you, That's to think about that as a successive series of death and resurrections is not an unreasonable idea. I think that's how people experience it even. Now, I don't know, how that's associated with the idea of the historical reality of the death and resurrection. That's a whole other can of worms. But I've had experiences too that have led me to the conclusion that that's not an idea that's so easily dismissed. So,
well, I think it's when people look at the resurrection, they often think of the event, and the church saw the event. And if you read, Colossians 1:15 and following from there, Colossians 1:15 basically says that Christ is the logos of the first creation, and he's the first fruits of creation 2.0. He's the first fruits of the second creation. And so, right there at that moment, everything comes together. And then N.T. Wright, for example, in his book, I saw you talk to Robert Coffin about the resurrection. So you're going to study it for about 3 years. And I think you should definitely look at N.T. Wright's The Resurrection of the Son of...
I've got his books.
Good, yeah.
I started, there's 3 of them, isn't there?
Yeah, he's got this whole, well, there's way more than 3. He writes more books than any of us can read. But his main series on, the people of God, and then the victory of Christ, and then the resurrection of the Son of God, and his last one is on Paul. But N.T. Wright basically says, the church never would have existed without the resurrection, and that's the best argument for the historicity of the resurrection, what it leaves in its wake. And so it's, I think your idea is right in terms of, he's the logos of the first creation, and the second creation begins at the resurrection, and that's why the church starts. And you're right. How on earth can you put this together? And I think part of what frustrates Christians about you and people, you're basically engaging a population that the church has for the most part, gotten zero traction with. And again, that says, okay, well,
that's also why I leave one foot in doubt. Mm-hmm. Because presenting those people with certainty is not going to work.
Right.
It's just not going to work.
Right.
So I have to say, look, I am giving all due consideration to your most radical doubts, because there's no way of opening up an avenue of communication otherwise. One of the things that's happened is that, and I don't know how widespread this is, but there's been some movement among the atheists who are watching what I'm doing and also calling themselves now Christian atheists, yeah. Which is a really strange phenomenon,
yeah.
but not an unwelcome one, let's say.
No.
So,
and one of the things, I haven't gotten around to making a video about this yet, but one of the things that we have to wrestle with is, to what degree is atheism a cultural construct? In other words, now I think to be fully Christian, you say you live as if the story is true, well, then you have to, one of the things I've learned from you, your stuff on Piaget, it's a drama. You have to act it out, which then makes a whole lot of sense about the shape of the Roman Catholic tradition, the Orthodox tradition, and then the timing of the Protestant tradition in terms of having to act out this drama. And so then if the resurrection has happened, and I think that basically accounts for the church, that they had to act out, what if the resurrection is true? Now we see this Jesus, we don't know what this means, but we have to act this out, and they're figuring it out.
Yeah, well, that's a funny thing, because that's one of the main themes that I'm developing in this video I'm releasing tomorrow. I had this strange idea a while back that, and this has something to do with the bending of time. And I don't know how to state it any more clearly than that. And I know that that's not very clear, but we don't understand time very well. We don't understand how the future and the past and the present are intertangled at all. And I would say, I believe that the statement that Christ's death redeemed humanity is true, but I also simultaneously believe that that doesn't mean we don't have to do the work. Those are both true, because you might think, well, once something has happened, it's over. It's like, well, not necessarily. I think something can happen in an eternal realm, let's say, and then play itself out in the proximal realm. And so even though the claim that the death and resurrection is the redeeming event, even though that's true, everyone still has to work it out. Everyone still has to act it out for it to manifest itself. Now, I don't know how those things can be true simultaneously, but I don't really care, because in some ways it's because if you look at your thought enough, you find that there are contradictions that are, no matter what you think, there are contradictions in what you think that are unacceptable. You might be unaware of them, but if you look, you find them. And so I run across contradictions in what I believe now and then, and I think that doesn't make me stop necessarily believing what I believe. It just makes me think that there's a bunch of other things I don't know. But I really like the idea that, the resurrection is the defining event, but that still leaves us with the burden of making it manifest in some manner.
Well, you can argue that one of the things that church history has been trying to sort out for the last 2,000 years is exactly this relationship between what is accomplished and what our role is and what our responsibility is. And, in my tradition, the Calvinist tradition, this has been a focal point, and Calvinists have been famous, famously duplicitous on this, in that, yes, Jesus did it all, but then Calvinists are always telling people to go do stuff. And you're saying, well, if he did everything, why do we have to do this stuff? And we say, well, we don't know, but that's what we got.
Well, that's right. Well, it would be nice to broach that question directly. And also to broach the ignorance, because the other thing I felt too is that, here's another way of thinking about it, is that you could say Christ's victory is inevitable, but that doesn't mean that it's not in doubt. That doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense, but I think it has to do with the paradoxical relationship between the eternal and the ephemeral. The reason that, so those things can't, well, we know of physical phenomena that are that strange. So do you know that at the speed of light, the universe contracts to a single point that's right? So as you speed up faster and faster, as you get closer to the speed of light, the universe collapses and contracts in front of you until at the speed of light, it's a single dot. It's flat and it's a single dot, which is part of the reason you can't go faster than the speed of light, because at the speed of light, the universe is flat and contracted to a dot. It's like, well, how the hell can that be true and what we have around us be true at the same time, right?
Right.
Those things, they don't coexist easily in the same universe, but they're both true.
Especially when things are traveling at the speed of light all the time.
Yeah, like light.
Yes.
Doing that all the time.
All the time.
The universe light inhabits is very unlike the universe we inhabit.
No, that's right.
That's right. Be true simultaneously. Here's another fact. This is a good one. So if you go outside at night and you look up at a star it's 20 million light years away. So it took the light 20 million years to reach your eye. That photon would not have left the star if your eye wasn't there to receive it.
You said that in the biblical lecture, and I can't figure that out.
Well, right. I mean, what are you supposed to make of that?
So
what you make of that is that we don't understand time. And that's an easy thing to swallow, because obviously we don't understand time. Like, that's obvious.
Yeah.
So that's not going to come as a shock to anyone. So Colin got in touch with you, eh?
Yeah. He sent me an email right after I started making videos, and we've been conversing via email back and forth.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah. So what motivated him to do that? Do you know?
Well, he said, there's a lot of people talking about you, and he saw my videos and he thought, well, this guy's actually kind of taking him seriously and trying to think through stuff. And so he just kind of reached out to me to let me know he was watching and if I had any questions. And of course, you've been on this status rocket, so I'd shoot him questions and think, well, what do you think of this? And he'd say, well, I think Peterson means this, and then when things come out, you do an interview or there's a report on you, and I'll send something to him or he'll send it to me, and he'll say, well, I think they got this right and I think they got this wrong. And so he's been really helpful to try to help me try to figure out what you're doing, because that's kind of been my obsession in this is what's this guy doing, and why is he changing the world in the way that he's changing it? And of course, you probably don't know either, but the world is changing. And
I know one part of it. I mean, when I wrote Maps of Meaning, my goal was to understand the reason for the rise of nihilism and the ideological divide between the West and the communist countries, to understand that and to see if I could resolve it. That was my goal, because I always thought if you could understand something, that a resolution would emerge,
Right.
That's what understanding meant. And so it was out of that I developed the conviction that the West's emphasis on the divine sovereignty of the individual was not just arbitrary.
Mm-hmm. But then you wrote that book in '99, and there it sat, which is interesting. Yeah. And now suddenly, bang.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of that. It was probably more like one of those doublings that characterize artificial intelligence, is that it didn't just sit, because I was teaching it. And then I worked for TV Ontario, and it got out on the television. Then it went on YouTube. So there was this expansion of interest, but it started very small. And then, of course, over the last 2 years, it's been, absolutely incomprehensible. Yeah. But it also probably took me, it took me 14 years to write that book, and then probably another 15 years to figure out how to explain it in a relatively condensed period of time. I mean, I'm still trying to figure that out in many ways.
Yeah.
It's not a simple thing. Well, as you no doubt know, it's not a simple thing to take something that complicated and to make it different durations.
And connect with different people.
Talk to Jonathan.
Oh yeah. Jonathan and I had a conversation.
How'd that go?
Oh, that was great. He was easy to talk to. We both have foreign mission experience, so we could have talked all day. That was great fun.
Yeah, I should tweet that one. I'll do that right now.
On the Neil Postman thing, it was very interesting because you tweeted one of my videos, the one I did about The Office, and then everybody's writing me, oh, your thing's going to explode, and it didn't. And so it really makes me think about, who we are in these different media. You're someone on Twitter and you're someone on YouTube, and you're someone in person, and it's really weird how even these little social media universes don't connect.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah, we're very fractionated in we've become very complex in our identities, which is why we have username and password troubles, right? We've become so complicated that one name doesn't work anymore.
Huh. So you've got this. One of the questions I've had for you is, now you've got your book timing was spectacularly perfect. All of these little fights that you've had, they've been, again, I'm a Calvinist, so this stuff looks absolutely providential. If you had to map how a guy's going to kind of explode on the landscape quickly.
Right.
Have you thought about institutions? Because, Os Guinness had this saying, nothing changes without the individual, but nothing lasts without the institution. And Christians get bothered when I say this, but Jesus wouldn't be Christ without the church. And now I know you have your own little church that you made, but but have you thought about, okay, so you're on this status rocket and you're certainly getting attention. What does this look like institutionally behind you?
I guess I would say that remains to be seen. Because it's not even clear what the relevant institutions are. Because, is YouTube an institution? Is online video an institution? Does it have any longevity? Like, is it like a book? The most lasting institution has been a book.
Yeah.
And YouTube gives the spoken word that kind of reach. All this new social media, that's a whole uncharted universe. And I could say, well, the university is the institution, but I have way more reach on social media than I could even in any possible manner within a university. It's not even of the same order of magnitude.
Yeah.
I'm working it out as I go along,
Yeah. Yeah.
I do. I'm definitely going to do another series of biblical lectures. I'm just waiting for the time to do that. I'm really looking forward to talking about Exodus and the Mosaic stories, because I actually know them. I knew the first 3 or 4 stories in Genesis pretty well. I didn't know the Abrahamic stories very well, so I had to get up to speed on them pretty quick. But I know the Mosaic stories pretty well, and so I'm really looking forward to diving into those. And I'm going to make that a priority, the biblical lectures, because they've been very impactful, weirdly enough. So, and since I'm trying to put some bedrock, or reveal the bedrock, I suppose, at the foundation of our culture again, there's no better way to do it than to go back right down to the bottom. So it's an antidote to nihilism and possession by human dogma. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. And it was, again, part of what caught my interest initially is, first I heard about the pronoun thing and thought, oh, look at that. That's interesting. And then this guy's talking to people about the Bible. And I have friends who have churches in Toronto, and they've got plenty empty seats. And hundreds of thousands of people are listening to you about the Bible, and that just blew me away. So then I just thought, I gotta hear what this guy's saying about it. And so I'm really interested. Terms of,
it really is strange. It's really strange. I always joke to people that, I put together business plans in my life, and I thought, okay, well, imagine I put a business plan in place for what I did last year, right? I'm going to rent a theater 15 times, and then I'm going to do public lectures on the Old Testament to young men.
It's crazy. I'm really curious. The beginning of Exodus is very preachable. As a pastor, that once you hit the law and the tabernacle. And then when you hit Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, I mean, people who say, well, I'm going to read through the Bible, I just think, yeah, I'll see you when you get to the middle Exodus, because boy, people in our culture have no frame of reference for that entire world. And actually, I was preaching through some of this stuff, and then I started listening to your lectures, and I think probably with your psychological approach and probably with some of the Jungian stuff, you might be able to make better sense of it for a lot of people than kind of the way that preachers have been, especially Protestants have been trying to address it. It's really difficult.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I mean, one thing you can say about what the church has done is that it's at least conserved the stories.
Yeah.
Which is a big deal, right? So
yeah.
For whatever the church hasn't done right, it has done that. And that's really something. I mean, but I think we're at a point now where it looks to me like we're at a point now where we don't need to just remember, we also need to understand. I think that's the shift. That's the Nietzschean death of God shift, is that it has to be not only listened to and repeated, but also understood. And okay, I think it's understandable. So
well, and can we understand it without acting it out? I mean, that's part of what you've taught me is that.
I don't think you can. I think that if you understand it, it scares you so badly that you will then act it out, because it's the less frightening alternative. I mean, people have been congratulating me on my courage, and I think, no, you don't understand. I'm just afraid of the right things. What do they say? Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It's like, yeah, right. I should go. I've got someone else who's going to talk to me.
Okay.
It was really good meeting you, and like, good luck with what you're doing, and I hope that you have some success in making sense out of this. If you manage to, let me know.
Okay, well, I'll keep making my little videos. So if it's okay with you, I've recorded this. If I could post this, is that okay with you?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
A lot of people have been asking me, what's this conversation going to look like? So here it is. So thank you very much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Nice talking with you.
Good talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.